and welcome back to the Mystery Theory. Today I am going to cover a case that it's a little bit controversial, that I don't really like to share that much on my channel, but it was requested over and over, and so I decided not only to cover what happened in that McDonald's in San Isidro, San Diego, but also a little bit of what happened prior to that event where James Haworthy walked into a McDonald's and took the life of many people. This is a subject that is hard to cover here on YouTube because of the rules, so I'm going to try to keep it as PG as possible, and I am also going to try to use different words, and I hope that you can read between the lines and fill in. I feel like that way we can still have an idea of what happened there, but at the same time try to keep it, try to not share some gruesome details that might be disturbing. Now, for those of you who do not know this case, I will give you a brief idea, and then I'm gonna go back a few weeks into James' life and tell you everything that happened that led to this. This is not an excuse for what he did. This is the chain of events that kind of got things started in his mind. And I think I usually like to start with that, but for those of you who do not know what happened, this was in 1984 in San Isidro, San Diego, California. This event took place in a McDonald's during lunchtime. About 45 people were inside. They were chattering, they were eating, they were having a good time. Kids from the neighborhood were going to get a hamburger, people passing by, tourists in the area. It was a pretty normal day, but James Haworthy that day decided to walk in with, and I'm gonna read it because I have no idea about guns, specifics of guns, and he had a pump action shotgun, a 9mm Browning HB semi-automatic, and a 9mm ex-carabin, along with a cloth bag over his shoulder full of ammunition that he needed for each one of those guns. Now, at the time, James was 41 years old, and I want to make things clear that there's a lot of people that are going through what he went through prior to that day, yet it never crossed their minds to do what he did. So my point is, everything that I'm going to tell you right now, take it as a background story for what happened, and not, again, as an excuse, because his life was pretty tragic. But I know a lot of people lived at that time and dealt who dealt with the pressures of society, and what they thought about divorce. And I'm sure that a lot of kids were bullied at the time, yet they didn't go around doing what he did. Okay, so James was born on October 11th, 1942 in Ohio. When he was 7 years old, his parents got a divorce, and at the time, and in the area where he lived, where there were a lot of Amish kids in his same school, and Mennonites, I can never say that word, but they just, divorce was a foreign thing for them, and divorce for them was a foreign thing. They had no idea what it meant to have parents divorced. So sadly, soon after, he was cast out. He started to get bullied, and people started to put him aside. They didn't want him to hang out with them. He was the quote-unquote freak. He was the weird kid. He was the unusual kind. And because of that foreign concept of divorce that James couldn't really do anything about, that is what started the rest of his life as a student in a really bad way. Now, as you can probably imagine, he became a loner. He didn't want to hang out with friends because he didn't have any. So people would judge him for being a loner, for not having fun with her friends. But just so you have an idea, every single boy in the 8th grade at the time was in the football team, and he didn't make it. He didn't want to be part of the football team because he was more interested in more academic stuff and not so much in sports. He was always a little bit, he always had a temper, at least when he started the middle school. And it was apparent to a teacher in one occasion when he was inside the classroom because the boys were practicing football outside, and she had some kind of an argument with James, and she told James if he was a real man, he would be playing football outside. Not the greatest thing to say to anybody, really, but that's what she said, and it really marked him. It really scarred him to hear it from now a teacher, that he wasn't a real man, that he wasn't really like the rest. Middle school went by, he started high school, and when he was in high school, it was pretty much the same thing. Never involved in sports or in activities at the school, but he still managed to graduate in 1960 with not even a picture of him in his senior year book, or I guess his picture wasn't in it. I keep banging something here. So as you can see, this stuck with him. He continued to be a loner and a little bit odd. When he was 20 years old, he met Edna, his wife in the future. They briefly dated, fall in love, and got married. They moved in with his dad for a while, and James knew that even though his school years weren't fun, he needed to go back to school to get a degree and hopefully get also a better paying job. He wanted to be a funeral director, and so he ended up going to Malone University in Canton, Ohio, and he did graduate from as a funeral director with a funeral director, I don't even know, diploma degree in Pittsburgh Mortuary School. However, he never paid his $15 license fee, so he never got his license. When he started to work as an apprentice, his dream was to become a funeral director, but his boss realized that this guy really was a loner, and he did a lot better alone with the bodies instead of kind of running the whole thing. He described him as odd, but nothing alarming at the time. However, when we start to see how other people saw James at the time, we can start to see a pattern. James used to go to this church, but his pastor described him as bitter against God with an explosive personality and inner conflict. Even at home, his neighbors were a little bit afraid of him. He had a German Shepherd that would destroy property, bark all day. The neighbors in the beginning were complaining about it, but James took the time to put signs all over the house, I guess, the fences and everything, with no trespassing signs, and almost a little bit paranoid with the idea of somebody trying to get to him or his home. The scary part of that, he had a collection of guns, and his fascination for them started in the 8th grade. So at this point, he took the time to collect little by little all those guns that he loved, quote unquote loved. One of the incidents that it's very well known in this case is when his 2 daughters, I think they were 2 years apart, so they would play together, they would have, same friends, and they had a fight, a physical fight with another neighbor's daughters. I guess they were sisters too. And at the end of the fight, the parents were arguing, and James said that he would get even. At that point, things calmed down, apparently. But 2 weeks later, he invited the entire neighborhood, kids in the area, to go and have crackers at his home. Little did this girl know that, his daughters had an argument with one of them, went, and it was a setup. And when she got in, one of the daughters came out of, I don't know if it was a closet or what it was, and punched her very hard. Now, the father went there, and it was a big thing, and now he asked him, James, why would you do that? And he said, I always pay my debt. You would think that was enough for James. It wasn't. 2 months later, he helped his daughter hide in some bushes and wait for the same girl to go by to jump on her. And I don't know, it's just so bizarre. But the girl jumped out of the bushes and punched the other girl again. Now, we don't have much about the mom, but we know that Edna was arrested once because she told one of her daughters to physically assault somebody at school. And after the incidents, the mothers got into a fight, and Edna, she said that she was going to go and grab a gun to get even. I don't know if she was actually going to do that, but that was enough to be arrested. However, they never took the gun. That was later on used by James. It was, at this point, you can totally see how this family was very dysfunctional. The girls were into witchcraft and Satanism. They talked about everyone about it. So they were not only violent, but seen under a different light because of their differences. Now, there was one time that a co-worker got really worried about James, who was having money problems because he couldn't hold a job long enough. He blamed the government, and he also said that President Ronald Reagan was conspiring against him. He, at the same time, was applying for residence in Mexico, and he briefly moved to Tijuana, and he briefly lived in Mexico before coming back to the States, but not to Ohio, but to San Isidro in San Diego, California. There he struggled to find a job again because of his temper and his bad attitude. And when he finally got a job as a security guard, he was later on fired because of his attitude. So at this point he was devastated, and he decided to take his own life. Edna walked in on it, and he talked him out of it, which is something that later on she said that she regretted. Now, after his wife saving him, he decided that something was off, that he probably had some kind of a mental illness and that he needed help. So he told his wife that, and he called a clinic, to this mental clinic, that the issues that he was having. At that point, the receptionist saw how calm, relaxed, and polite he was, and put him in a non-crisis callback list. However, she told him that they were going to call him that day. So, James sat by the phone and waited all day for that call that never came. So, at that point, he was trying to reach out, and you can tell that by him sitting by that phone all day long, you can only just assume that he really was struggling and was going through some kind of a crisis. However, They did never call that day because he was put in a non-crisis list that would take 48 hours for somebody to call you back. And she also misspelled his name. When he didn't receive the call after the time was up, he jumped in his motorcycle and left. Edna was really worried about him. He was not in a good state of mind. But when he came back happy. He had dinner with his wife and daughters. They went for a bike ride and then came back to watch a movie. Things seemed to be okay. I think that was the indication that he already made his decision. And I'm gonna read this because it's pretty clear that I can't really understand what he was going through. But he said that he was done with society, that was the final blow, that they never called him, and that society had its chance and never take it. So now it was going to be a matter of taking justice or making them pay attention to him. So he gives his wife goodbye. He gives his daughters, and Edna knew something was wrong. He never kissed them. He wasn't affectionate. He wasn't a huggy kind of husband or father. But she let him go. When he got inside the McDonald's, he pointed his gun at this employee working the cash register. He was only 16 years old, and at first he thought it was a prank because the gun didn't work. Then he pointed to the ceiling. It worked. Everyone went down on the floor. Victor Rivera was 25 years old at the time and tried to talk him out of it. But he ended up with 14 gunshots. And of course didn't survive. There was a pregnant lady with an 8 months baby with her. And they were shot too. He made a point to go to different areas where adults were shielding either the elderly or kids, and took care of that. There were these 3 kids riding their bikes to go buy a hamburger, and he got rid of them from the inside. And finally, this elderly couple that were going to eat, they got in the restaurant and he took care of the lady, leaving the husband cursing and with his wife in his arms, and then he ended up taking care of the husband. So you can see this was a disaster. It was evil, and I can't even describe how I feel about those flashes of images that go through my mind while I'm telling you this story. I can't understand how anybody would have the ability to do such evil, not only to people, but adults, but kids and pregnant ladies. I mean, you're probably wondering, as I was, where is the police at this time? Because after a few shots, or you would think that everyone would know around. Well, the dispatcher gave them the wrong address, and they eventually arrived. I don't understand. It took 78 minutes and 245 rounds for them to take care of James with a sniper that positioned himself. They didn't know if there were more than one because of the different guns that were used, but they took care of James, and he lay there with all the people that he took care of before. The ages of the victims ranged between 4 months old and 74 years old. There were 21 people that passed away and 19 critically injured. Only one made it to the hospital and later on died. They rebuilt the McDonald's within 2 days, which I thought it was interesting, and I didn't know this part of the story, but it wasn't the same. I can't blame people for not thinking, let's go to that McDonald's. And they ended up tearing it down and making a memorial in its place. Now, this is one of those hard cases, because, and that's why I don't really like to cover them that much or at all. If avoidable, I will always avoid these cases, but because they're senseless, you know what I mean? According to everything that I could find out about this guy, he wanted to make a point. He wanted to get back at society for being mean to him, for casting him out, for believing that society made him into this person he hated. Now, if you hate yourself, it's very hard to love other people. When you don't want to be here in this world, you don't see the point for other people either. You think that it's the same. And this was something that I was listening to this expert that explained this thing with the people that commit this kind of let's call it thing. But so if they can't even put value into their lives, how can they put value into others? In their delusional minds, they believe that there is something better somewhere else. Not here. Not with these people. Not with the people that bullied them, cast them out, that made them into the person that they are. And the truth is, nobody made them into that. He took it in a way that he turned himself into that. Now, in this particular case, I believe that he had some kind of a mental problem. He probably had some kind of a psychosis. They never explained really what kind of illness, but it was made very clear that he was mentally ill. which is not an excuse for doing anything like this. I know a lot of people who struggle with a mental illness, and it's interesting to see how, they cope in a different way. They try to find comfort, a solution, a way out of how they're feeling because of their illness. Some, like James, he became the victim of this illness. He wasn't a loner because he chose to be. He wasn't a loner. He was a loner because people cast him out. But he didn't make an effort to find his group. He was okay being alone. He knew he had a mental illness, and he did reach out in the end. But if we don't have any kind of mental illness record, that meant he probably didn't know he had something. I remember at one point I had 4 kids, and my kids are 2 years apart. So I had a newborn, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And I thought I was going crazy. I truly thought I was going crazy. And I told my mom, she came over for breakfast that morning, and I told my mom, I think I'm going crazy. And my mom laughed at me, and she said, if you were, you wouldn't be saying that. And I always wonder why she said that to me, but I guess after listening to all the experts in this case, it makes sense. When you are mentally ill, you don't see a different life, so you don't know what it is like to live without it. So for you, it's a normal thing, even though it's not normal to everyone else. So James didn't know. In some cases, there's people that love us, and they will tell us, hey, why don't we get this looked at? Why don't we go to the doctor? Why don't, I've seen people with mental illness that had people around them that loved and cared enough for them to see that something was off and tell them, because they didn't know. Sadly, in this case, Edna could see it, yet maybe she was afraid of James. Maybe she was afraid of what he could do. Maybe the parents couldn't see the signs that something was off, that he was suffering, that he wasn't a quote-unquote normal, because not because he was different, but because he was struggling and he was developing something that turned him into what he was in the end. So I'm not here trying to tell you that I'm an expert in mental illness, but and I'm not here to sit and just excuse somebody for what he did. But I'm here with this case to tell you that we should know the signs, and we should care enough to tell other people when something is not right. More often than not, people that deal with a mental illness don't know it. And when they do, they want to get help. They want to feel better. Nobody in this world likes to be in a miserable state, and that was the state that James was. Depressed, couldn't hold a job, violent, enraged. What kind of life is that? He didn't have anything to look forward to. He didn't have anything to believe in. He didn't have a way out of the way things were because he didn't know. And yes, it would be easier to blame that receptionist that picked up the phone and didn't understand that people with mental issues can be polite, can explain things. But it wasn't her fault either. This was like a chain of events that led to something really horrible and unspeakable, and I guess, I don't know, all over the world, but here in America, as parents, as people that go to the movies, that go to the mall, and you hear the stories, and I don't know. After what happened in Vegas, I've never been a fan of Vegas, though, honestly, but I always like to stop in for a night when we were on our way to California, and I haven't been since then. Not because I'm afraid of something happening, but it left that bitter taste in my mouth that I can't get it off. I remember a few faces I saw in the news, and I remember the stories of husbands that were stayed behind, other friends that got sick and never got the chance to go, and so they didn't have to experience it. And I don't know, there was an incident in the Salt Lake area not even a year ago too, in a mall, and I'm like, what are we doing? What's going on? Why is this out of control? And I don't have the answer. I can't tell you why this is going on. I can only tell you that I can't see a solution, and that's scary. I think that's why it scares me so much, because I need to find a solution for a problem. And when the problem is too big, I can't see it. I can't. And I guess that's part of the mystery of life. And I hope that those things would stop. I hope that something can be done to make it stop. But if I were sitting there by somebody in the power to change it, I don't have the answer. I don't. Some people want to get rid of guns altogether. Some other people want some not to be able, some kinds of weapons to not be able to, people to sell it. And I'm coming from a third world country where carry a gun, it's illegal. You carrying a gun, it's illegal. And yet, it's very violent. And there is a lot more crime than we should have for a 3.5 million in the entire country. So if somebody wants to do something, they will find a way to find what they need to do what they want. That's my point. But I wish I had something, a solution that I could sit down with somebody in power today and say, this is what we should do. This will fix it. But that really can't cross my mind. I don't know, and believe me, I've thought about it long and hard. Stupidest thing ever, because hey, nobody's gonna listen to me, right? But I always like to have, a solution for a problem, even if I can't fix it. And sadly, this is another of those cases that leaves me empty, because I can't. And I guess, I don't know. I guess it's scary. But I also guess that living scared or living afraid of something that can happen to you, it's not the way I want to live or raise my kids or see my grandkids grow up in. I want them to be brave. I want them to face life with a positive attitude and stay away from the things that might be a little bit fishy. I have a lot of people that every time we go hiking, and like I have a hiking video here on the channel, that we got there and it was nighttime when it was time to go back. We didn't plan things through. It was a dense forest, no light. And people would ask me when I got home, why would you do that? That was stupid. And I guess I know it wasn't the smartest idea to go at the time that we decided to take a very long hike. But at the same time, I am not afraid of a bear. I am not afraid of a mountain lion. I am not afraid of, the dangers of being on a hike. Where I guess I should put it in a different way. I am afraid that something can happen, but I have the courage to do it anyways. Now, it's a different kind of fear. I think being afraid it's healthy. It keeps you alive. It keeps you out of trouble most of the time. But my point with the hike is that sometimes we're so scared that we stop doing stuff because we're afraid that something horrible is going to happen. The truth is, more than likely you'll have an accident in a car than flying on a plane. And a lot of people don't fly and travel the world because they're afraid of a plane. Some people is afraid of going on a hike and find a black bear, and truth be told, those are very rare. It happens. But again, you have a million more chances of dying driving to work. Yet that's normal, because society tells us that it's a risk worth taking, because we need to go to work. We need to show up on time. So, can you see how the fears are managed around us? So I don't want to live in fear, even though these things happen. I don't want to teach my kids to be afraid. I want them to be cautious. I want them to be alert. I want them to be smart about it. And that there is a possibility. But I want them to go on hikes and not be afraid of bears. I want them to go backpacking with me in the backcountry and learn how to put our food away so we don't lure in the bears. I want them to go to a movie and not be afraid of something happening there. And if they are, I want them to overcome it. do it despite of the fear that you have inside. Now, don't take it the wrong way. If it's something dangerous, if it's something that, you know, you don't know how to swim and you're afraid of a pool, you're not going to jump in a pool and drown. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is manage that healthy fear that stops you from doing something that more than likely is not going to happen to you. Chances are very minimum that they're going to happen this year. I know some people that won't move close to the ocean because of what could happen. Those are the kind of fears that I'm talking about. The fears that stop us from living our lives to the fullest. And this is the one we got. We don't have any more. Once we expire, we expired. So I hope that even though this was a hard case and maybe a little bit depressing, I hope to leave you with some kind of thought of not living in fear, but still be smart about it. Thank you so much for being here for another Soft Spoken Wednesday. I'll see you guys back here on Friday for a new true crime whispered video. Bye guys.